When you deal with an avoidant person, someone who runs the moment things get real, your instinct might be to chase, to fix, to prove your worth. But the truth is, the more you chase, the faster they run. Because what the avoidant fears most isn't love, it's losing control. They're drawn to strength, not neediness. They want connection, but only with someone who stands firm in their own power. And that's where most people get it wrong. You think vulnerability means lowering your standards or shrinking your presence to keep someone comfortable. It doesn't. Vulnerability without strength becomes desperation. Real vulnerability is courage, standing your ground while being open. It's saying, I care about you, but I will not beg you to care about me. You must understand something: avoidance, respect, resistance. They test boundaries not because they're cruel, but because they're afraid. They push to see if you'll collapse. And when you don't, when you stay calm, grounded, and centered in who you are, something changes. Their fear meets your strength, and strength, my friend, is magnetic. People often ask, how do I get them to stay? The answer is you don't. You become someone worth staying for. You challenge them not through conflict, but through composure. You show them that connection isn't control, it's courage. You don't lecture, you demonstrate. You don't plead, you embody peace. That's how the power shifts. The avoidant starts realizing that the one thing they've been running from, emotional depth, is actually the thing they need the most, because they finally see it in a form that doesn't threaten them, strength combined with compassion. And that's the secret to keeping them. You stop trying to keep them. You hold your line. You let them meet your boundaries instead of your fears. That's what awakens respect. That's what builds attraction that doesn't fade. When you challenge an avoidant with strength, you're not just teaching them how to connect, you're teaching yourself how to lead. And in every great relationship, personal, emotional, or professional, leadership is love in action. Every human interaction is a negotiation, not in words, but in energy. When you deal with someone who is emotionally avoidant, they are constantly observing one thing: how much of yourself you are willing to give away just to keep them close. They don't run because you said something wrong. They run when they sense that your self-respect has a price and that you're willing to lower it. That's where your challenge begins. You must teach people, especially avoidant ones, how to treat you. And the way you teach is not by talking, it's by demonstrating. When you set a standard, you create gravity. You're saying, this is who I am, and this is the level of energy I accept around me. If they rise to it, they stay. If they don't, they drift away. And that's not loss, that's clarity. You cannot keep an avoidant by becoming smaller. You can only keep them by becoming stronger. The more you honor your values, the more they start questioning their distance. Because people don't respect what you compromise for, they respect what you stand for. And when you stop apologizing for your strength, you stop giving them permission to pull away whenever they feel uncomfortable. That's how power works in relationships. It's not about control. It's about self-command. When you operate from calm authority, the avoidant begins to sense something unfamiliar: safety. Not the safety of passivity, but the safety of consistency. You become the anchor in their storm, not by clinging to them, but by standing tall when their emotions waver. But let me be clear, this isn't manipulation. You're not playing hard to get. You're being hard to lose because your peace is not for sale. That's the kind of challenge that forces growth. The avoidant begins to see that you don't bend to earn love. You build love by embodying discipline, patience, and truth. You teach them through your steadiness that relationships thrive not in constant pursuit, but in mutual respect. When you stop enabling their escape and start embodying your worth, they face a choice: evolve or leave. And whichever they choose, you win, because you've already chosen yourself. That's the paradox. The moment you no longer need to keep them, you finally have the power to connect with them. True love doesn't come from holding on. It comes from standing firm. One of the biggest mistakes people make when dealing with avoidant personalities is thinking that closeness will cure distance. They believe if they just show more love, send one more message, explain their feelings one more time, the avoidant will suddenly understand and stay. But the opposite happens. The more you chase, the less they value your presence. Because when there's no space, there's no tension, and without tension, there's no growth. See, the human mind is wired to value what isn't always available. When you step back, not as a game, but as an act of self-respect, you create contrast. You remind both of you that connection is a choice, not an obligation. The avoidant needs to feel your absence to appreciate your presence. They need to experience the silence that follows your strength. That silence speaks louder than 1,000 explanations. Boundaries are not walls. They're doors with locks that only open to those who knock with respect. When you set boundaries, you're not pushing people away. You're teaching them how close they're allowed to get. It's emotional architecture. You're building a space where both people can breathe, reflect, and grow. Avoidance tests this constantly. They pull away to see if you'll chase. And when you don't When you stay calm, grounded, and unbothered, you're doing something extraordinary. You're flipping the emotional dynamic. You're showing them that your self-worth doesn't depend on their approval. And that's what shifts everything. Because suddenly, you're not the anxious one trying to connect. You're the centered one inviting connection on your terms. This isn't punishment, it's purpose. Distance without resentment is maturity. Boundaries without anger are power. When you respect yourself enough to walk away from chaos, you send a message that no words can deliver. My peace matters more than your patterns. And here's the truth. Avoidants are not bad people. They're people who fear vulnerability because they've been hurt before. But you can't heal someone's fear by absorbing it. You heal by modeling what healthy love looks like: consistent, calm, and confident. So give space, not as revenge, but as revelation. Let distance do the teaching that words never could. Because when you learn to walk away with grace, you stop trying to prove your worth. You start embodying it. And that's when the dynamic changes. The avoidant begins to feel something new: respect. And respect, not reassurance, is what keeps connection alive. In any relationship, especially with an avoidant person, the real battlefield isn't between you and them, it's inside you. It's the war between your impulse to react and your ability to remain calm. See, most people lose that battle because they confuse emotion with action. They think feeling something means they have to do something about it right now. But that's not strength. That's surrender. Emotional control isn't about suppression, it's about strategy. It's the ability to feel deeply but act wisely. When you can stay composed while someone else withdraws, you're operating from a higher plane of self-awareness. You're no longer letting their patterns dictate your peace. And that's what truly disarms an avoidant, because they expect you to panic, to chase, to break your frame. When you don't, when you remain still, calm, and focused, they have no control over the situation. You've taken your power back without saying a word. This is the part that separates emotional amateurs from emotional leaders. Emotional amateurs react to everything. They interpret silence as rejection, distance as abandonment, and coldness as cruelty. Emotional leaders, the ones who grow, evolve, and attract deep respect, interpret those same moments differently. They see silence as information. They see distance as space to think. They see coldness as someone else's fear, not their own failure. That's the mindset of power, because when you can control how you interpret things, you control how they affect you. And that's the ultimate freedom, not being owned by your emotions, but owning them. Avoidance subconsciously tests this. They pull away to see if you'll break. But if you can breathe, detach, and stay grounded, something remarkable happens. You stop being predictable. You stop feeding their cycle of push and pull. And when the dynamic changes, they begin to question their own behavior instead of controlling yours. You see, real influence doesn't come from forcing outcomes. It comes from mastering your internal state. The calmer you are, the clearer your energy becomes. The clearer your energy, the more power you have to lead the emotional rhythm of the connection. And that's where transformation begins. When you stop needing people to behave a certain way for you to feel okay. Because the moment your peace depends on someone else, you've handed them your control. So reclaim it. Protect it like your life depends on it, because it does. When you master your emotions, you don't just keep the avoidant engaged, you evolve beyond needing to chase them at all. You become the grounded, unshakable force they're drawn to. Control the emotion, and you control the connection. Control the connection, and you control your destiny. Here's a truth most people avoid. Literally, connection doesn't come from comfort. It comes from challenge. We've been conditioned to think love means ease, that harmony means avoiding friction. But that's not how human psychology works, especially with someone avoidant. The avoidant is wired to retreat from control, to run from dependence, to resist anyone who makes them feel confined. But what they can't resist, what they need, is someone who challenges them to rise. Challenge isn't confrontation. It's not yelling, demanding, or forcing. Challenge is presence with standards. It's the silent energy that says, I see your fear, but I won't shrink to make you comfortable. That's what pulls an avoidant in. They may not admit it, but they crave someone who holds their ground, someone who doesn't disappear when things get tense, someone who forces them to look at the very thing they've been running from, themselves. See, when you challenge an avoidant, you're not fighting them, you're fighting the story they've told themselves about relationships. The story that says, if I get close, I'll lose myself. If I let someone in, I'll get hurt. But when you stand firm, not chasing, not withdrawing, just being unmovable, you show them a new pattern. You show them that intimacy doesn't have to mean control. That closeness doesn't equal chaos. That someone can love them without losing themselves. And that's when something begins to shift. The avoidant starts to feel safe, not because you made it easy, but because you made it real. You made it solid. You became the mirror that reflects their strength, not their fear. Here's the paradox: the moment you stop trying to keep someone, that's when they want to stay, because they sense that your world doesn't revolve around them. It revolves around truth, purpose, and self-respect. And people, even the most distant ones, are magnetically drawn to strength wrapped in compassion. So challenge them not with anger, but with authenticity. Challenge them to communicate, to be present, to grow. But most importantly, challenge yourself to not lower your frequency to meet their comfort zone. You rise, and they'll either rise with you or reveal who they truly are. The goal isn't to win them, it's to awaken them. And in doing that, you awaken yourself. Because every time you challenge someone to face their limits, you face your own. Never fear being too much for someone who fears depth. Be the challenge that awakens courage, not the comfort that enables avoidance. There comes a moment in every relationship, every pursuit, when you realize that holding on too tightly is the very thing destroying what you're trying to save. Especially with an avoidant person, the more you chase, the more they run. The more you explain, the more they retreat. It's human nature. What feels like pressure will always create distance. So the ultimate test of strength isn't in fighting for connection. It's in knowing when to walk away. With dignity, not defeat. Walking away doesn't mean giving up. It means you've reached a point of clarity where your peace matters more than persuasion. It's that quiet confidence that says, I did my part. I showed up. I gave my best. But I refuse to lose myself trying to keep someone who isn't ready to stay. That's not weakness. That's mastery. Because it takes extraordinary emotional strength to let go of what you love when it no longer respects your energy. Avoidance, and honestly many people, are subconsciously drawn to those who can detach without bitterness. When you walk away with calm, with purpose, with your integrity intact, you send a signal that resonates on a deeper psychological level. You communicate, I don't need you to complete me. I choose myself because I value truth more than comfort. That message is more powerful than any argument, any chase, any pleading could ever be. And here's the paradox. That's often when the dynamic shifts. When the avoidant feels the real consequence of losing your presence, not your anger, not your attention, but your absence. That's when reality hits. Because now they're faced with silence that doesn't seek, a peace that doesn't beg, a strength that doesn't chase. And that's the energy they can't ignore. But even if they never return, you've already won. Because walking away with dignity resets your entire identity. It reminds you that your worth was never tied to their willingness to stay. It was always rooted in your ability to stand alone, whole, and unshaken. Letting go is not weakness. It's a declaration of freedom. It's the choice to protect your spirit rather than bargain for someone else's love. So when that moment comes, when you feel the pull to chase what's fading, take a breath, lift your head, and remember this, the same strength that once held on is the strength that now lets go. Walk away not to prove a point, but to prove your power. Because the moment you can leave with peace in your heart, you've already become everything you were trying to find in them.